The night my mom kicked me out at midnight, she didn't even look me in the eyes when she said it. We were standing in the narrow hallway of the house I'd grown up in, the same hallway where she used to walk me to my room when I was scared of the dark. Her voice was calm, almost tired, like she was talking about taking out the trash. "You were a mistake," she said, and then she opened the front door. The cold air rushed in, and just like that, my entire life changed. Before that night, my life had always felt complicated but stable. My mom, Clara, raised me on her own after my dad left when I was a baby. She used to say we were a team, that it was just the two of us against the world. We lived in a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but it was home. I helped her with chores, worked part-time after school, and tried my best to make her proud. She wasn't an affectionate person, but I thought that was just her way. I told myself love didn't always look like hugs and kind words. Sometimes it looked like food on the table and a roof over your head. As I got older, though, things started to feel different. My mom became more distant, more critical. She'd comment on how much I ate, how much space I took up, how expensive it was to raise me. If I got a good grade, she'd say, "That's what you're supposed to do." If I made a mistake, she'd act like it was proof that I was a burden. I tried harder. I cleaned more, spoke less, and learned to make myself small. I thought if I just stayed quiet and useful, things would get better. By the time I turned 20, I was working 2 jobs while taking evening classes at the community college. I paid for my own phone, my own clothes, and most of my food. The only thing my mom still covered was the roof over my head. I figured that was fair. She reminded me often that I was lucky she hadn't kicked me out already. Whenever we argued, she'd say, "You know you can't afford to live on your own." I started to believe her. The day everything broke was my mom's birthday. I came home late for my shift at the cafe, exhausted, but still holding a small cake I'd bought with my tips. I walked into the kitchen and found her sitting at the table with her friend Marissa, laughing over wine. I smiled and said, "Happy birthday, Mom," setting the cake down. She glanced at it and said, "That's it?" Her tone was sharp, like I'd insulted her. Marissa laughed awkwardly, and I felt my face burn. I mumbled something about being tired and went to my room. Later that night, my mom knocked on my door. She didn't wait for me to answer. She walked in, arms crossed, and said we needed to talk. Her words came out fast, like she'd been rehearsing them. She said she was tired of carrying me, tired of pretending she wanted me there, tired of my attitude. I tried to stay calm, told her I was working hard and doing my best. That's when her face changed. She looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in. "You were never supposed to be here. You were a mistake, and I'm done paying for it." I thought she was just angry, that she didn't really mean it. I told her I'd leave in the morning, that I just needed time to figure things out. She shook her head and walked out of the room. A few minutes later, she came back with my backpack and tossed it on the bed. "Now," she said, "you're leaving now." I packed what I could with shaking hands, some clothes, my laptop, a few books. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I stepped into the hallway, she was already waiting by the door. She didn't help, she didn't say goodbye, she just opened the door and gestured for me to go. That was when she said it. "You were a mistake." I stood on the porch in the middle of the night, holding my bag, watching the door close in my face. The house went dark. No light, no sound, just silence. I walked down the street with nowhere to go. My phone battery was low, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. The only person I could think of was my friend Lily from work. I called her, and when she answered, I broke down before I could even explain. She told me to come over, no questions asked. Lily lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, but they made space for me on the couch. I cried into a borrowed blanket until my chest hurt. Part of me kept waiting for my mom to call, to say she didn't mean it, to tell me to come home, but my phone stayed silent. The next few days were a blur. I went to work like nothing had happened. I smiled at customers, made their coffee, and thanked them like my world wasn't falling apart. At night, I lay on Lily's couch staring at the ceiling, replaying my mom's words over and over in my head. You were a mistake. I started to wonder if she'd always felt that way, if every cold look and harsh comment had been leading to this moment. A week passed, then two. Still no message from my mom. I finally worked up the courage to text her. I kept it simple, just asking if we could talk. The message was marked as read. She never replied. That's when something inside me shifted. The sadness was still there, heavy and constant, but underneath it I felt something else. A quiet, steady anger. I realized I'd spent my whole life trying to earn love from someone who never wanted to give it. I'd made myself smaller and smaller, hoping she'd see my effort. But she hadn't. She'd only seen a mistake. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I just knew I wasn't going to beg her anymore, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly like she wanted. 3 weeks after the night she kicked me out, I got a call that would change everything again. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, and for a second, I almost ignored it. I was on my break at the cafe, sitting on the back steps with a cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to convince myself that my life wasn't completely broken. Something told me to answer. When I did, a calm female voice said, "Is this Emily Carter?" My stomach tightened. I said yes, and she introduced herself as a legal assistant from a small law office across town. She explained that my grandmother, my mom's mother, had passed away 2 months earlier. I barely remembered my grandmother. My mom had cut contact with her years ago, and I'd only met her a few times as a kid. The assistant told me there was something I needed to know. My grandmother had left a letter and specific instructions in her will, and my name was included. I didn't know how to react. Part of me felt guilty for not even knowing she was gone. Another part of me felt numb. The assistant asked if I could come into the office to discuss the details. I said yes, mostly because I didn't know what else to say. When I walked into that small, quiet office a few days later, I had no idea my entire understanding of my family was about to change. The lawyer, a kind-looking man with gray hair and gentle eyes, handed me a sealed envelope. "This is from your grandmother," he said. "She asked that you read it in private." I opened the letter with trembling fingers. My grandmother's handwriting was neat and careful, every word clearly thought out. She wrote about how she'd watched my mom change over the years, how bitterness had taken over her heart. She said she'd always wanted to be there for me, but my mom had kept us apart. Then came the sentence that made my chest ache. "Emily, you were never a mistake. You were the best thing that ever happened to our family." I cried right there in the lawyer's office, the words blurring as tears fell onto the page. My grandmother went on to explain that she'd set aside money for my education and my future, something my mom had never told me about. The lawyer explained the details gently. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help me get on my feet, to finish school, to breathe a little easier. As I left the office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I used the money carefully. I found a small studio apartment close to my jobs, nothing fancy, but mine. I bought secondhand furniture and decorated with thrift store finds. For the first time, I had a space that felt safe, a place where no one told me I was a mistake. Life didn't magically become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still felt lonely sometimes. But I started to feel proud of myself. I was surviving on my own. I was building something from nothing. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. It said, "I need to talk to you." My heart jumped into my throat. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I agreed to meet her at a small diner we used to go to when I was a kid. When I walked in, she was already sitting in a booth looking smaller than I remembered. She didn't apologize. Instead, she launched into her problems. Her rent had gone up. Her job was cutting hours. She said she was stressed and overwhelmed. Then she looked at me and said, "I heard you came into some money." The words felt like a slap. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say she was sorry for what she'd done. She just wanted something from me. I told her calmly that the money was for my education and my future. Her face hardened. "So you're just going to abandon me now," she said, "after everything I did for you?" I felt the familiar guilt creeping in, but this time I pushed it away. I reminded her of the night she kicked me out. I reminded her of what she'd said. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I was angry," she said. "You know I didn't mean it." But the truth was, she had meant it. She'd shown me exactly how she felt. I told her I wasn't going to support her financially. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me the way they used to. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked out. A few weeks later, I got a call from Marissa, my mom's friend. She told me my mom was telling everyone that I'd abandoned her, that I'd turned my back on my own mother. It hurt, but it also made something clear. My mom cared more about her image than about me. That's when I decided I was done staying silent. I didn't want revenge in the dramatic, destructive sense. I just wanted the truth to be known. I wrote a long, honest post online about what had happened. I didn't insult my mom. I didn't exaggerate. I just told my story. About the night she kicked me out, about her words, about how she only contacted me when she needed something. I didn't tag her, but people who knew us both saw it. The response shocked me. Messages poured in from friends, relatives, even old neighbors. Some apologized for not seeing what was happening. Others shared their own stories of being pushed aside and told they weren't enough. For the first time, I felt seen. My mom called me furious. She accused me of embarrassing her, of turning people against her. I told her calmly that I'd just told the truth. She hung up on me. A month later, I heard through Marissa that my mom had been forced to move out of her apartment. She was staying with friends, struggling, and angry. Part of me felt sad for her. Another part of me felt something close to relief. The woman who called me a mistake was finally facing the consequences of her own choices. But the story didn't end there. A few months after my mom was forced to move out, she showed up at my door. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by textbooks, trying to study for an exam, when I heard a knock. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, my chest tightened. She looked tired. Her hair was unkempt and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I have nowhere else to go." The old version of me would have let her in without hesitation. The girl who had spent her life trying to earn her mother's love would have made excuses for her. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I stepped aside and let her in, but only to talk. She sat on the edge of my couch, her hands twisting together. She told me she'd lost her job. She said people were treating her differently, looking at her with judgment. She said she felt alone. Then she looked up at me, her eyes full of something that almost looked like regret. "I didn't mean what I said," she murmured. "You weren't a mistake." I took a deep breath before responding. "You said it, and you meant it enough to kick me out in the middle of the night." She started to cry, quiet, shaky sobs. For a second, I felt my heart soften. But I reminded myself of all the nights I'd cried alone, all the times I'd felt worthless because of her words. "I'm not here to punish you," I said softly, "but I'm not going to let you hurt me anymore." She asked if she could stay with me. I shook my head. I offered to help her look for resources, shelters, or job programs. She didn't like that answer. She wanted comfort, not solutions. When she realized I wasn't going to give her what she wanted, her expression changed. "You really have turned against me," she said bitterly. I watched her walk out of my apartment, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. I poured my energy into my studies, my work, and the friendships that had supported me when I had nothing. I started therapy, something I'd never thought I deserved before. I learned how to unpack the years of emotional damage, how to stop blaming myself for someone else's cruelty. One evening, Lily came over with takeout and a smile. We sat on the floor laughing about work drama and bad customers, and I realized how far I'd come. I had a home, people who cared about me, and a future that felt like mine. I still thought about my mom sometimes, not with anger, but with a quiet understanding. She had her own pain, her own brokenness, but it wasn't my job to carry it anymore. Months later, I received another letter from my grandmother's lawyer. It wasn't about money or legal matters. It was just a final note my grandmother had written, meant to be given to me after I'd had time to find my footing. In it, she said she hoped I'd learn to see my own worth, even if my mother never did. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box with my other important papers. It felt like a reminder of who I really was. I wasn't a mistake. I was a survivor. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough.